How, how did you do it? Michael Reed, stunned as he watches his son stand with Maria's help. In the quiet, softly lit bedroom of Michael Reed's penthouse, Maria Vasquez, a black woman with a gentle touch, guides young James with unwavering patience. James, paralyzed for years, rises unsteadily to his feet, a faint but undeniable sign of progress. Michael stands frozen, arms crossed, his eyes wide with disbelief at the sight of his son's movement. However, Michael's mother and older brother exchange skeptical glances, their faces etched with doubt. They question Maria's unconventional methods, their concern for James's recovery palpable. Can Maria's unique approach break through the family's skepticism? Will she help James reclaim his life? Stay tuned to witness the next chapter of this heartfelt journey, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button for the latest updates. Share where you're watching from, and join us as we uncover the truth behind James's remarkable recovery. The penthouse was cold, the silence overwhelming. Michael Reed stood by the large window, eyes fixed on the distant city below. He had everything: money, power, a prestigious reputation. But none of it mattered anymore. The emptiness inside him, ever present since the accident, consumed him. It wasn't just the loss of his wife, but also the paralysis of his son, James. Michael tried to fill the void with work and distractions, but nothing could quiet the silence. James had been motionless for over 5 years, a prisoner in his own body. After the accident, the doctors had given up, calling him a lost cause. Michael refused to believe it, though the certainty in their voices was chilling. He couldn't let go of the hope that one day his son might come back to him. The penthouse felt like a museum, pristine and untouched, a reminder of what was lost. Michael hated how it all seemed frozen in time, like a life paused. No laughter, no warmth. Even the staff moved in silence, as if the grief in the air was contagious. He glanced at the portraits on the walls, reminders of a life he no longer recognized. Lillian, his wife, was gone. James, the son he once knew, now sat silently, staring into nothingness. And Michael? He was a shell of the man he used to be. He walked to James's room, hand resting on the cold doorknob. Inside, James sat by the window, still as ever. His body worked, but his soul seemed trapped. Michael had spent millions on therapy, treatments, and experimental programs, but nothing had worked. The silence had become suffocating, a reminder of all they had lost. A soft knock at the door broke his thoughts. Maria Vasquez, the housekeeper, stood in the doorway, holding a cloth in her hand. She was unlike the polished staff he usually hired. Quiet and unassuming, she somehow brought warmth to the cold, lifeless space of the penthouse. "Mr. Reed," she said softly, "James has been responding to the music. A little, just a twitch. I thought you should know." A twitch. Michael blinked, his heart racing with disbelief. "What do you mean, a twitch?" "I was singing to him," Maria explained, her voice gentle. "Just trying something different. His fingers moved. Just a little." Michael stared at her for a long moment. It seemed impossible. James hadn't shown any sign of life for years, and now Maria was telling him that he had moved? It was absurd, but the tiny spark of hope began to flicker inside him. "Show me," he said, voice flat, but his heart pounding. Maria led him into the room. The light was dim, and James sat as he always did, staring out the window. As Maria gently placed her hand on James's, she began humming a soft lullaby. And then, just as she had said, James's fingers twitched. For a moment, Michael couldn't move. He stood frozen, his breath caught in his throat. His son had moved. Not much, but it was something. It was a sign, tiny but undeniable. Before Michael could react, his mother entered the room, her expression disapproving. "Michael," she said, her voice sharp, "this nonsense. You can't think this will help him. Music isn't therapy." Michael's brother followed, his arms crossed. "This is madness. You've spent millions on proper treatments, and now you're trusting a cleaning lady playing music?" Michael felt the weight of their words pressing down on him. His family, the ones who should have supported him, were mocking the tiny spark of hope that had just ignited. The tension was suffocating, and Michael felt himself crumbling under it. But then he looked at Maria, standing by James, calm and unshaken. She wasn't backing down. She believed in what she was doing. And in that moment, Michael knew what he had to do. "Leave us," he said firmly, voice low but resolute. His mother and brother exchanged a glance, then turned and left, the door clicking softly behind them. Michael stood in silence for a moment, staring at the closed door. Then he walked over to James, kneeling beside him. He took his son's hand, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself to believe. "Maybe, maybe she's right," Michael whispered, voice trembling. "Maybe this is the start of something. Something real." The next morning, Michael stood by the elevator, his hand gripping the polished metal. The events of the previous night echoed in his mind, the spark of hope he had seen when James had moved under Maria's touch. It felt unreal, but he couldn't deny it. A flicker of hope, however small, had been kindled, and it was Maria who had started it. The elevator doors opened, and Maria stepped out with her cleaning supplies. Her presence, once unnoticed, now seemed steady and purposeful. She was no longer just a cleaner. She had become a force in the house. Despite his family's disapproval, Michael found himself trusting her in ways he hadn't trusted anyone in years. He still didn't fully understand why he had let her into their lives, but somehow Maria had become an important part of their journey, believing in James when no one else did, including Michael himself. Her belief had shaken something deep inside him. As their eyes met, Michael felt a silent understanding pass between them. She had become more than a housekeeper. She was a constant presence, breathing life into the space. "Maria," Michael said, his voice soft with uncertainty, "I need to talk to you." She looked at him with calm, patient eyes, as though she had anticipated this moment. She nodded silently, waiting. He motioned toward the hallway where James's room stood. Maria followed him, and they stopped just outside his door. Michael hesitated before speaking again. "I don't know if this is real," he confessed, "but last night, what I saw, it's impossible. James hasn't moved in years." Maria placed a hand on his shoulder, offering a quiet, warm reassurance. "Sometimes the hardest thing is to believe in what you cannot see." Her words lingered in the air, and for a moment, Michael felt his chest tighten. He had heard those words before, but never with such conviction. "I've been doing this for years," Maria said. "It's not the machines that heal, it's the connection. James can feel this. He knows you're here. Sometimes it takes more than just hope." Michael swallowed hard, his emotions threatening to overwhelm him. He wasn't used to feeling vulnerable, to letting someone into his world. Yet Maria's belief was something he hadn't seen in years. They entered James's room, and Maria resumed humming a soft lullaby. As she placed her hand gently on James's, Michael stood at the doorway, hesitant to move closer. He saw the faintest twitch in James's fingers, so small it could have been missed, but it was there. A sign, a possibility. The room was silent except for the sound of Maria's humming. Minutes passed, and James's hand shifted again, this time with a bit more purpose. Maria kept guiding him gently, letting the moment unfold at its own pace. Michael watched, his heart pounding. He had seen the reports. James was a lost cause. But now, seeing his son respond in such a way, he couldn't deny the hope growing inside him. "Is this real?" Michael whispered. Maria looked at him, her expression unwavering. "Yes," she replied simply. "It's real." Michael stood there, unable to speak. His disbelief lingered, but so did a growing sense of hope. Something was happening, and for the first time in years it felt real. He watched James move, his hands shifting slightly, his eyes still distant but alert. This can't just be from music," Michael muttered. "There has to be more to it." Maria didn't answer. She continued humming, her focus entirely on James. What mattered now was not the explanation, but the fact that James was responding. That was everything. Minutes passed and the room remained still. Michael stood beside Maria, watching, wondering what came next. He didn't know what to expect, but he had to believe that this was just the beginning. Maria's gaze met his, and for the first time, he saw conviction in her eyes. Now, she said, we keep going, one step at a time. The morning sunlight cast long shadows across the floor, illuminating the room in golden hues that almost made it seem as though time had slowed. Michael took a step closer, drawn to the scene before him. James was sitting in his usual chair, staring out of the window, but today there was something different. For the first time in what felt like forever, his eyes weren't distant. They were focused, tracking Maria's movements with a quiet intensity. His hand, which had remained lifeless for so long, was now gently twitching. It was so subtle that Michael wasn't sure if he had imagined it, but when he looked closer, he saw it again. A slight, almost imperceptible curl of James's fingers. Michael's heart skipped a beat. The sound of Maria's humming filled the room, soft and persistent, as if she were coaxing James back to life with every note. There was no rush, no urgency in her movements. She wasn't forcing anything. She was simply being with him, patient and calm. Michael watched as she gently took James's hand in hers, guiding it ever so slightly. Again, the smallest of movements. James's fingers twitched. It was the faintest shift, but it was there. Could this be real, Michael wondered? Could his son, who had been locked in silence for so long, truly be responding to this woman, this stranger who had entered their lives with nothing but a belief in connection? Maria's voice broke through the thoughts that were racing in Michael's mind. He's trying, Michael, she said softly, her gaze never leaving James. He's not as far gone as you think. Michael felt a lump in his throat. He wanted to argue, to push back against the impossible reality unfolding before him. But the evidence was undeniable. James was moving, his hand, his fingers, and his gaze. The changes were small, almost microscopic, but they were real. For the first time in years, Michael dared to believe that there was something more at work here than just his wishful thinking. As Maria continued, her voice unwavering, Michael's mind flashed back to the endless hours spent with doctors, therapists, and specialists who had all said the same thing. There was no hope for James. They had told him to prepare for a life of silence, of stillness, and yet here, in this very room, James was showing signs of life. Signs that weren't medical, weren't scientific, but real nonetheless. The skepticism that had always weighed heavily on Michael began to slip away, replaced by something else, a glimmer of hope, a tiny spark that he dared not extinguish. As James began to move more, shifting slightly in his seat, Maria placed her other hand gently on his shoulder. Michael watched, frozen, unsure of what to do. He had seen so much loss, so much emptiness over the past years. But now with Maria at James's side, there was a chance that he hadn't even considered before. For a long moment, there was only the sound of Maria's humming and the soft rustle of James shifting in his chair. Then, almost without warning, James turned his head slightly towards Michael, his eyes meeting his father's. The contact was fleeting, but it was enough. The weight of that look, the recognition, the faintest spark of understanding, was enough to send a surge of emotion through Michael. His throat tightened, and for the first time in years, he couldn't hold back the tears that threatened to spill. James had seen him. He had noticed him. In that brief moment, all the doubts and fears that had plagued Michael for so long seemed to fade into the background. James wasn't gone. He wasn't unreachable. He was here, and he was trying. Without thinking, Michael moved toward James, slowly, hesitantly. The closer he got, the more intense the emotions became. He reached out, his hand shaking slightly as he placed it gently on James's shoulder. James didn't flinch, didn't withdraw. He simply sat there, his gaze still locked on his father, his hand now resting more firmly in Maria's. A quiet understanding passed between them. Michael didn't need to say anything. The words had no place here. He didn't need to explain his doubt, his hesitation, his disbelief. James had shown him in the simplest of ways that he was still there, that all was not lost, and with Maria at their side, there was hope. Maria's voice broke the silence, soft yet firm. "This is just the beginning, Michael," she said. "He's still in there. We just have to keep reaching." For the first time in what felt like forever, Michael felt the tight grip of despair loosen. He wasn't alone in this. There was someone else beside him, someone who believed in his son in a way he hadn't allowed himself to believe. The weight of the world seemed to lift, even if just for a moment. As James turned his head away and returned to his quiet stillness, Maria stood and gently guided Michael to a nearby chair. She didn't need to say anything more. Her calm presence, the trust she had shown in James, was all the answer he needed. The morning sunlight poured into the penthouse with the same softness it had every day, but today it felt different. There was a weight to the air that hadn't been there before, a quiet tension that lingered in the corners of the room. Maria Vasquez stood by the large bay window, staring out at the city below. The soft hum of the air conditioning system was the only sound that filled the space. She hadn't been here long, but already the penthouse felt like a world of contradictions, luxury and emptiness, silence and faint flickers of life. Her gaze shifted to James, still sitting in his wheelchair by the window. He was more present now, more alert, his gaze following Maria as she moved around the room. But she wasn't looking at him right now. Her thoughts were far away, lost in a place that had nothing to do with this home, this family. It was a place she kept buried, far below the surface, where no one could reach it. There were parts of her that Michael would never see, parts of Maria that she had buried so deep she had almost forgotten they existed. But today, they were surfacing, unwilling to stay hidden any longer. She reached down and gently touched James's hand, a quiet reminder of why she was here, a tether to the present. The boy was making progress, slowly, but Maria had learned to be patient. Michael was starting to see it too. He had been reluctant at first, uncertain about her methods, but he was beginning to trust her. Maria could feel it, even when words were not spoken. The way he watched her with a mixture of skepticism and hope, he was starting to believe. But what Michael didn't know, what no one in this penthouse knew, was that Maria wasn't just here for James. She was here for herself too, and the wounds she carried were still fresh. Maria moved toward the kitchen, needing a moment to breathe, to clear her head. The room felt too still, too silent. The sleek, modern kitchen was clean, almost sterile, as though it hadn't been used in ages. She leaned against the counter, her fingers trembling slightly as she picked up a glass and filled it with water. The glass was cool against her palm, but it didn't help to still the storm inside her. The years of silence, of bearing what she didn't want to face, were catching up with her. Michael's family didn't understand her, but that wasn't new. They didn't understand her background, where she came from, or why she did the things she did. They saw a cleaner, a woman who didn't belong in their world. But Maria had learned to survive in that world, even if it meant hiding the parts of her that were too raw, too real. Maria took a sip of the water, the coolness of it doing nothing to ease the burning ache in her chest. She hadn't told Michael about the life she had left behind. She hadn't told him about her childhood, her mother's death, or the way she had been forced to leave everything she knew to survive. She had buried those memories so deep, she had almost convinced herself they didn't matter anymore. But that was the thing about pain. It never truly left. It just sat there, dormant, waiting for a crack in the armor to let it leak out. And now, as she stood in this grand penthouse, a part of her could feel those old wounds reopening. The door to the kitchen opened behind her, and Michael stepped inside. He had seen the tension in her shoulders, the way she had been avoiding his gaze. The question he had been asking himself for days now echoed in his mind. What had brought Maria here? What was she hiding? "Maria," Michael said, his voice softer than usual, almost tentative. "You've been quiet today, more than usual." She didn't turn to face him right away. Instead, she placed the glass back on the counter, her hands lingering on the smooth surface. "It's nothing," she said, her voice even, controlled. "Just a little tired, I suppose." But Michael knew there was more to it. He wasn't sure why, but he felt that there was something Maria wasn't saying, something that haunted her, something that she didn't want to share with him. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her than the woman he had come to rely on over the past few weeks. "Maria," Michael said again, his voice steady but filled with curiosity, "you don't have to hide from me. Whatever it is, you can talk to me." She turned then, her eyes meeting his for the first time in what felt like hours. There was something in her gaze that softened, something that wasn't there before. but her expression quickly hardened, and she turned away, crossing the room in a single stride. "I'm fine, Michael. I am." But Michael wasn't convinced. He had seen her act like this before. Distant, closed off, like she was trying to keep herself together. He wasn't sure what had caused it, but he knew she was hiding something, and it wasn't just the uncertainty of her methods with James. "I don't know what's going on with you, but I want to help," he said, his tone not demanding but gentle. "You don't have to carry whatever it is alone." Maria took a deep breath, her gaze faltering for a moment. She wanted to tell him everything. She wanted to share the pain she had buried for so long, but she couldn't. Not yet. Not when she was still trying to find her way through the shadows of her past. "Not everything can be fixed, Michael," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Some things stay broken." He didn't press her any further, but the tension between them thickened. They stood in silence for a long moment, the weight of unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. Maria could feel the pull of James's presence, a reminder of why she was here. But the truth was that James wasn't the only one who needed healing. She did too. Maria's thoughts drifted back to her childhood, the days when her family had struggled just to survive, when she had been forced to grow up too fast. She remembered her mother's final words before she passed away, words she had never truly understood until now. "You must always keep going, no matter what. Even if you feel like you're breaking, you must keep moving forward." But the truth was, Maria had never learned how to stop. She had buried her past so deep that she had almost forgotten how much it still haunted her. And now, with Michael and James, she was faced with a choice: to keep running, to hide behind the walls she had built for so long, or to face the brokenness and find a way to heal. She couldn't protect herself from the past forever. But for now, Maria chose to stay, to help James, and to believe in the connection she had begun to build with him. The past could wait. For now, James needed her, and that was enough. The tension in the penthouse was unbearable. The walls, once a symbol of opulence and security, now seemed to close in on Maria Vasquez. Michael had been distant for the past few days. His family's disapproval had festered, lingering in every corner of the house like a dark cloud. Maria could feel it. She could feel their eyes on her, their judgment, their questions. But what hurt the most wasn't the coldness of Michael's family. It was the uncertainty in Michael himself. He had started to doubt her methods, the very methods that had begun to show results in his son. The flicker of hope in James's movements was now overshadowed by the weight of Michael's indecision. The penthouse felt too quiet. The air was thick, stagnant. Maria sat in the living room, her gaze fixed on James, who was once again seated by the window. He was more alert than he had been in years, but his stillness reminded Maria of the battle ahead. It wasn't just about his recovery anymore. It was about whether she could continue to fight this battle, whether Michael would let her. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Michael entered the room, his presence unmistakable. There was an unease in the air, a heaviness she hadn't felt before. He stood in the doorway, his silhouette casting a long shadow in the dim light. "Maria," he began, his voice colder than usual. "We need to talk." She turned toward him, her heart pounding in her chest. She had been expecting this, but it didn't make it any easier. She had felt this coming, a shift, subtle at first, but now undeniable. Michael wasn't looking at her the way he used to. His gaze was distant, filled with a mixture of frustration and regret. "What's going on, Michael?" she asked, her voice steady, though she could feel the tightness in her throat. "I've been doing everything I can to help James." "I know," he replied, his words clipped. "But my family, they don't see the results. They don't understand why I'm allowing you to continue this. And honestly, I don't know if I do either." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. She had known that Michael's family didn't approve, but hearing him say it like that, so matter-of-factly, stung. She had come here to help, to make a difference, not just for James, but for herself too. Yet now she felt like an outsider once again, just a woman trying to carve out a place in a world that wasn't hers. "You're firing me." Her voice trembled, despite her best efforts to remain composed. Michael didn't answer right away. He took a step closer, his hands resting at his sides. The look on his face was one of uncertainty. But there was something else beneath it, a quiet sadness. "I don't know what to do, Maria," he admitted, his tone softer now. "I see what you're doing, I do. But I'm scared. I don't want to lose James. I don't want to make a mistake." "Then trust me," she said, her voice steady, the edge of vulnerability barely hidden. She stood up from the chair, her body tense. "Trust me, the way you've trusted everyone else, because I am here to help him, and I'm not going anywhere." Michael's face hardened, his lips pressing into a thin line. "I don't think you understand. You're not a therapist. You're not trained. You're just a woman who—" "Who what?" she interrupted, her voice rising, fueled by the anger that had been building inside her. "Who just cares? Who believes in James when no one else does? Who's willing to stay here and help him when no one else sees the possibility? Is that what you're so scared of, Michael?" The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. Michael didn't know how to respond. The words she had spoken echoed in his mind, but they didn't give him any answers. He had seen James's progress, seen the small changes that had happened under Maria's guidance. But the doubts, the fear, the pressure from his family, it all weighed on him. Maria took a deep breath, her gaze softening. "You don't have to fire me, Michael," she said quietly. "But you do have to make a choice. If you want to help James, you need to trust that what I'm doing is working. I'm not a doctor, but neither are the therapists you've hired. I know James. I know him in a way they never will." She turned away from him, her body stiff with emotion, her hands trembling slightly. She had no idea what was going to happen next. No idea if Michael would choose to let her stay or send her away. But one thing was certain. She couldn't back down now. She had seen James respond, even if it was only a small change. That flicker of hope was worth everything. "I've seen what you've done for him," Michael said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "But I'm scared of getting my hopes up. I'm scared of this not working." Maria turned back to face him, her eyes sharp. "You can't be afraid to hope, Michael. James needs that hope. He needs to feel like he has a future. I'm not giving up on him, and I'm not giving up on you either." Michael looked at her for a long moment, and for a brief second, their eyes locked, the weight of their unspoken words hanging heavy between them. Then without a word, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving Maria standing there, her heart pounding in her chest. But as the door clicked shut behind him, Maria didn't give up. She didn't collapse in defeat. Instead, she straightened her shoulders, took a deep breath, and walked back over to James. He was still sitting quietly, his eyes looking toward her, though his gaze wasn't as distant as it had been before. She sat down beside him, gently taking his hand in hers once more. She wasn't going to leave. Not now, not ever. She had come too far, and she wasn't about to let anyone, least of all Michael, make her walk away. She had her doubts, her fears, just like him. But James needed her, and she wasn't going to abandon him, no matter what. With a quiet resolve, Maria began to hum once more, her voice soft and steady, the melody filling the room as she focused all her energy on James, on this one small boy who had taught her, in so many ways, that healing wasn't just about fixing what was broken, it was about reaching out, about trust, about connection, and that was something no one, not even Michael, could take away from her. The sun had barely risen, but the penthouse was already alive with the hum of morning. Maria stood at the window, her gaze drifting over the skyline. The city outside seemed to pulse with life, a stark contrast to the stillness she had become accustomed to within these walls. She didn't know what today would bring, but she could feel a change in the air, as if something was shifting beneath the surface. For the past few days, Michael had been quieter. His doubts, once so visible, had lessened, but there was still hesitation in the way he watched her, the way he observed James. He hadn't said much since their confrontation, but Maria knew that James's progress was undeniable. Michael had seen it for himself. James was responding, moving his fingers, turning his head, and even blinking in a way that felt like communication. Small, subtle changes, but the kind that gave Maria hope. Today, however, was different. Today, something in her felt more certain. The tension that had been hanging over her seemed to lift, replaced with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in weeks. She had no more doubts, no more fear. James was reaching out to her, and she wasn't going to let go of that. As she walked over to James, she could feel the familiar presence of Michael behind her, watching. But today, instead of the distance she had felt before, there was something else in the air, a quiet anticipation, an unspoken agreement. Michael wasn't just watching, he was waiting. He was ready. James was sitting by the window as usual. The same spot, the same stillness, but today there was something different about the way he sat. His eyes were fixed on Maria, following her every movement, his expression not vacant but focused. Maria smiled softly to herself as she knelt beside him, reaching for his hand. She gently took it in hers, her touch light but firm. For the first time in what felt like forever, she could feel the faintest tension in his fingers, a subtle resistance against her touch. "Today we take another step, James," she whispered, her voice steady, full of confidence. She didn't know if he could understand her words, but she knew he could feel her presence, feel the trust she had in him. And then it happened. Without warning, James moved his hand. A tiny shift, but it was enough. It was like a wave breaking the surface of still water. His fingers curled just slightly, and for the first time Maria saw it, a sign of deliberate motion. It wasn't a twitch. It wasn't random. James was trying. Michael stepped forward, his breath catching in his throat as he watched the moment unfold. He had seen the change in his son, but it had always been so small, so tentative. This was different. This was purposeful. James was reaching for something, and Maria was the anchor that had brought him back. "What's happening?" Michael asked, his voice hoarse, almost disbelieving. "His hand moved," Maria replied, her voice calm but filled with emotion. "It's real. He's doing it." There was no doubt in her voice. She had known all along that James was capable of more. She had never stopped believing that the smallest connection could spark the greatest change. And now in this moment, she was seeing it. As James continued to move his hand, Maria guided him gently, her touch firm but loving. She didn't rush him. She didn't force the movement. She just held his hand, waiting, letting him take the lead. And slowly, inch by inch, James began to move more confidently. The progress was small, but it was there. It was happening. Michael stood beside them, his eyes wide, unable to tear himself away from the scene. His heart pounded in his chest, his mind racing with thoughts he couldn't process fast enough. He had been so sure that his son's recovery was impossible. He had doubted Maria, doubted the power of connection. But now, as he watched James respond, something inside him shifted. A small flicker of hope ignited in his chest. He had never seen James move like this before. It was as if the years of silence and stillness were being undone, piece by piece, with every small motion of James's fingers. "Maria," Michael whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you. I didn't believe this was possible." Maria didn't answer right away. Instead, she focused on James, her eyes locked on his hand as it continued to move. She had never doubted, but she understood his hesitation. It wasn't easy to believe in something that had seemed impossible for so long, but now they were seeing it together. James was healing, not through medicine, not through therapy, but through trust, through a simple connection. James moved again. This time his hand shifted even more, a slight but distinct motion, as if he was reaching out, reaching for something beyond himself. Maria's heart swelled with pride, her hand gently holding James's, guiding him with patience, with care. This was what healing looked like, not the quick, dramatic recovery people expected, but the slow, steady progress that came from connection, from love. Michael reached out, his hand hovering over James's, as if he wasn't sure whether to touch him or not. He wanted to. He wanted to reach out and share in the moment, but there was a hesitation in his eyes. He had been afraid for so long, afraid of losing James, afraid of hoping. But now he saw what Maria had seen all along. He saw his son not as a patient, but as a person, as someone who could still reach out, still feel, still move. With a deep breath, Michael placed his hand on James's shoulder. A simple gesture, but it meant everything. He didn't need words. He didn't need explanations. He just needed to be there, with them, in this moment. The room was silent except for the faint sound of Maria humming softly, the same melody that had been the backdrop to James's progress. The air felt different now, lighter, warmer. For the first time, the tension had lifted, replaced by something more powerful. There was no need for words. They had come together, two broken souls finding their way back to each other, piece by piece. As Maria continued to hum, she felt the connection between them strengthen. This wasn't just about James, it was about them. Michael, James, and her, finding their way back to each other. The walls between them had crumbled, and in their place there was something far more beautiful. Understanding, trust, hope. The room was suffocatingly silent, but it felt alive with possibility. Maria's breath was shallow, her pulse quickening as she sat beside James once again. His wheelchair faced the large window, the morning sunlight spilling across the polished marble floors in long, golden streaks. For the past few days, James had shown signs of improvement, small, almost imperceptible movements. But today there was something different in the air. It wasn't just his progress, it was the shift in Michael. The man who had once doubted her methods, who had questioned every step of this journey, was now standing in the doorway, watching them with a kind of intensity that made her heart race. James hadn't said a word, and for a moment, Maria allowed herself to believe that words weren't necessary. His gaze was fixed on her, his eyes more focused than ever. He hadn't looked at her like that in years. There was a connection here, one that Maria had always believed in, but Michael had yet to accept. Today, though, she could feel it. The walls between them were coming down. She reached out slowly, placing her hand on James's arm, her fingers brushing against his cold skin. It had been a long time since she had seen him react like this. The subtle shift in his hand the other day had been tiny, almost too small to notice. But today, his fingers twitched in response to her touch, his hand coming to life, just enough for her to feel the small spark of movement. Without speaking, Maria whispered, "Come on, James, let's take another step." She could feel the familiar pulse of hope flicker in her chest, just as it had when she first met him, when she believed in his potential before anyone else. She wasn't about to let go of that belief now. Behind her, Michael remained silent. His presence was palpable, heavy with uncertainty. Maria could feel his eyes on her, though she refused to look back. She knew Michael had doubts. His family's opposition had only fed into them. But he was here, wasn't he? He hadn't walked away yet. That in itself was progress. James's hand twitched again, and this time it was more deliberate, more controlled. Maria could feel the resistance as his fingers curled inward, his grip on her hand tightening just slightly. She was right. He was trying. In that moment, Maria felt something shift between them. It wasn't just James moving his hand. It was the breakthrough they had all been waiting for, the tiny but undeniable sign that James was coming back to life. Michael took a step forward, his breath catching in his throat. "What's happening?" he asked, his voice raw. Maria turned toward him, her gaze unwavering. "It's happening, Michael. He's moving. He's trying." Her words were a declaration, not a question. There was no hesitation in her voice. She had known this would come, had known it from the moment she began working with James. But seeing it unfold before her eyes felt like a victory she hadn't dared to dream of. Until now. She had fought so hard, not just for James, but for herself. She hadn't been wrong. And now in this moment, neither of them could deny it. Michael stepped closer, his hands trembling as he reached for James's shoulder. He paused before making contact, as if uncertain whether he should touch him. The distance between them had always been there, the invisible wall built by Michael's grief, his fear, and his guilt. But today that wall is thinner than ever before. As Michael's hand rested on James's shoulder, a wave of emotion washed over Maria. She didn't know if she was more moved by James's progress or by Michael's gesture. They were closer than they had ever been, and the tension between them seemed to ease just enough to allow something more profound to take root. James moved again, this time with more purpose. His hand shifted, his fingers curling toward Maria's. It was small, so small, but it was there. Maria looked at Michael, and for the first time in weeks, she saw a flicker of something in his eyes, something she had been waiting for. Trust, hope, maybe even belief. I, Michael began, his voice faltering. I didn't think this would happen. I didn't think he could move again. The room felt quieter now. The sound of James's breath, soft but steady, filling the space. Maria could hear the weight of Michael's words. He had been so sure that there was no hope for James. The doctors, the therapists, they had all said the same thing. But now they were witnessing the impossible. They were seeing James fight to come back, to reclaim something he had lost years ago. Maria couldn't suppress the smile that tugged at her lips. He can. He's doing it. And just like that, it was as if the universe had whispered back in their favor, reminding them both of something important. Healing wasn't just about the body. It was about connection, about the quiet moments where trust was built, not through words, but through presence. James was healing, not because of some miraculous treatment, but because Maria had never stopped believing in him. And Michael, now standing beside them, had finally let go of his doubt, if only for a moment. With his hand still resting on James's shoulder, Michael looked down at his son, his heart heavy with gratitude. I didn't want to believe, but now I can't deny it. You've done something I couldn't. Maria turned back to James, gently cupping his face in her hands. This isn't just me, Michael. It's all of us. He's been waiting for us to believe, to reach him, and now he's reaching back. The sound of James's fingers shifting, even ever so slightly, was like music to Maria's ears. She could feel the connection between them, stronger than ever. James wasn't just a patient anymore. He was a boy, a son, a person who had been waiting for this moment and for someone who cared enough to make it happen. It wasn't perfect, this moment. It wasn't the grand breakthrough people expected, but it was real. And for Maria, that was enough, more than enough. As the minutes passed, Maria remained at James's side, her hands never leaving his. Michael had stepped back, giving them space, but there was something in his eyes now, a softness, a quiet respect that hadn't been there before. He wasn't just observing anymore. He was part of this, part of their shared journey. For the first time in a long time, Maria felt like she had a place here. She wasn't an outsider anymore. She wasn't just the hired help. She was part of this family, this fragile, broken family that had been stitched back together one moment at a time. The evening was calm, with a soft breeze drifting through the open windows of the penthouse. The quiet hum of the city below felt distant, almost like a memory. Inside, the atmosphere was charged with an emotion that hung in the air, like a secret being shared. Maria stood by the window, her gaze fixed on James, who was in his wheelchair, looking out toward the horizon. It had been a long journey, one filled with doubt, pain, and moments of despair. Yet today, something had changed. James had taken another step, a small but significant step. The room felt different now. The tension that had once filled the air was slowly being replaced with a quiet sense of hope. Michael was standing by the door, his arms crossed, his gaze soft as he watched Maria and James. His face no longer held the uncertainty it had for so long. It was as though he had finally let go of the walls he had built around himself, the ones that had kept him distant and cautious. Maria, Michael said, his voice almost a whisper, I don't know how to thank you for this, for everything. She turned to face him, her eyes meeting his, but she didn't respond immediately. There was nothing left to say. They had both been through so much, too much perhaps. But now they stood at the edge of something new, something that was more than just recovery. It was a chance for something deeper, something more lasting. Thank you for trusting me, Maria said simply. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything they had been through together. She didn't need to say more. Michael had seen it, the small changes in James, the way his eyes tracked movement, the way he had started responding to her touch. James had been through so much, and yet he was still here, still fighting. For Maria, that was the greatest gift. They were silent for a moment, all three of them. The only sound was the soft creaking of the penthouse as the breeze moved through it. James turned slightly, his eyes meeting Maria's. There was something in his gaze, something that had been missing for so long. It wasn't just recognition. It was the quiet acknowledgement of a connection, a bond that had formed between them, one that went beyond words. Suddenly, James moved his hand. It was slow at first, hesitant, but it was deliberate. He reached toward Maria's hand, his fingers curling gently around hers. A wave of emotion washed over Maria as she held his hand, feeling the warmth of his touch. It wasn't the grand breakthrough people had expected, but it was a moment of connection, of something more profound than mere physical recovery. Michael stepped forward, his heart in his throat. He watched as Maria smiled at James, her face filled with pride and love. James had always been more than patient with her. He was someone she had believed in from the beginning, someone who had a future, even when it seemed impossible. And now, for the first time, Michael could see it too. James wasn't just a boy trapped in a body that didn't work. He was a person with thoughts, feelings, and a future. "I never thought I'd see this," Michael whispered. "I never thought James would come back to us." "Not just back," Maria replied, her voice filled with emotion. "He's still here, Michael. He never left." For the first time, Michael felt the weight of those words. It wasn't about fixing James. It wasn't about returning to what they had lost. It was about moving forward, together. Maria had shown him that healing didn't always look the way people expected. It wasn't always clean or linear. Sometimes it came in the form of a simple touch, a flicker of recognition, a moment of connection. As the evening wore on, Maria sat beside James, her hand still holding his. Michael stood nearby, not saying much, but watching them with a look that was somewhere between disbelief and awe. The silence between them was comfortable now, filled with understanding. "Maybe this is enough for now," Maria said after a while. "Maybe we don't need to see everything fixed. Maybe we just need to see that there's still hope." Michael nodded, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. He had spent so long clinging to control, to certainty, that he had forgotten the power of hope. Maria had reminded him of that, of the possibility that even in the darkest times, there could be light. He had been so afraid of losing James, but now he realized that he had almost lost himself in the process. "You've given us that, Maria," Michael said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've given us hope." There was a pause, and then Maria smiled softly. "No, James did. He's the one who's still fighting. All I've done is give him a reason to keep going." As they sat there, the world outside the penthouse seemed distant and unimportant. For the first time in a long while, they were present, together as a family. The road ahead was still uncertain. There would be challenges, moments of doubt, but for the first time in a long time, Maria felt like they had taken a real step forward. And just as the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the room, James shifted again. This time he moved his head toward Michael, his eyes locking with his father's. It wasn't much, a slight tilt, a movement that could easily have been overlooked, but it was enough. Michael's breath caught in his chest as he realized what was happening. James was reaching out, not just to Maria, but to him. For the first time in years, Michael felt a tear slip down his cheek. He wasn't sure if it was because of the progress they had made or because of how much he had feared this moment would never come. But as he looked at James, looked at him for the first time in so long, he realized that this wasn't just about recovery. It was about love, about connection, and about the strength to keep moving forward no matter what. As the night deepened, the three of them sat there, in the quiet of the penthouse with the future stretching before them. It wasn't perfect. It never would be. But in that moment, they had found something more valuable than perfection. They had found each other. Thank you for following James, Maria, and Michael's journey with us. Their story is a reminder of the power of hope, connection, and resilience, something we all can relate to in our own lives. What did you think about their journey? How did it resonate with you? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to share it with someone who might need a little inspiration today. Thank you for being a part of this story, and we look forward to bringing you more heartwarming tales. See you next time.